My name is Ainsley. I'm 28 years old, and I never imagined the people who were supposed to love my son would be the ones hurting him. I stood there in their dining room, watching my 4-year-old Tommy's tears roll down his bruised face while my mother-in-law Dorothy avoided my gaze. When I finally found my voice to confront them, my father-in-law Robert slammed his fist on the table so hard the dishes jumped. His words still echo in my mind. "If you don't like how we handle things, get out of our house by the end of the month." Before I continue this story that changed everything for my son and me, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Please hit that like button if you believe children deserve protection, and subscribe to hear more real stories from parents who fought back. Trust me, what the hidden camera revealed will shock you as much as it shocked me. This is the story of how I discovered the truth about my own family and how one brave decision to record everything saved my son's future. Life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. 18 months ago, my husband Daniel died in a car accident on his way home from work. One moment I was planning our son Tommy's 3rd birthday party. The next I was identifying my husband's body at the morgue. The grief was overwhelming, but I had to keep going for Tommy. As a nurse working at the local hospital, I was barely making ends meet with daycare costs eating up most of my salary. When Daniel's parents, Dorothy and Robert, offered us a place to live, it seemed like a blessing from heaven. Dorothy was 58, a retired elementary school teacher who always wore pearls and kept her gray hair in a perfect bob. Robert, 62, was a bank manager who prided himself on being a pillar of the community. They lived in a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial house in the suburbs, the same house where Daniel grew up. Initially, they seemed like the perfect grandparents, showering Tommy with toys and offering to watch him while I worked my shifts. Dorothy would say things like, "We're family, dear. This is what families do for each other." I was so grateful, so relieved to have support during the darkest period of my life. The first few weeks were almost peaceful. Dorothy would have dinner ready when I came home from my 12-hour shifts. Robert would play with Tommy in the backyard, pushing him on the swing Daniel had played on as a child. Daniel's sister Melissa would visit frequently with her husband Carl. Melissa was 32, a stay-at-home mom who ran the local PTA like a military operation. She'd bring her 2 kids over, and they'd all play together while the adults talked about Daniel, sharing memories that made us laugh through our tears. But slowly, things began to change. It started with small comments about my parenting. Dorothy would purse her lips when I let Tommy have a cookie before dinner. "In my day, children had proper meal times," she'd say. Robert would shake his head when I read Tommy's stories instead of making him practice writing his letters. "The boy needs discipline, not fairy tales," he'd mutter. I brushed it off as generational differences, telling myself they meant well. Then came the schedule changes. I was working double shifts to save money for our own place eventually, which meant leaving the house at 5 in the morning and not returning until 8 at night. Dorothy insisted she didn't mind watching Tommy, but her comments grew sharper. "A mother should be home with her child," she'd say while folding laundry with aggressive precision. Daniel would never have wanted his son raised by strangers. The irony that she was essentially calling herself a stranger seemed lost on her. Tommy started changing too. My bright, chatty little boy became quiet and withdrawn. He'd cling to me when I tried to leave for work, crying in a way he never had before. When I asked him what was wrong, he'd just shake his head and bury his face in my shoulder. I noticed he'd flinch when Robert walked into the room, and he'd grow tense when Dorothy called his name. My maternal instincts were screaming that something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what. The first concrete incident happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd managed to get home early from work, excited to surprise Tommy. Instead, I found him sitting on the porch steps with a badly scraped knee, dirt on his face, and tears streaming down his cheeks. Dorothy was inside watching TV, completely unbothered. When I asked what happened, she waved her hand dismissively. "Boys will be boys, Ainsley. He was running around and fell. No need to make a federal case out of it." But Tommy's eyes told a different story, and the scrape looked too severe for a simple fall. That night, I found more bruises on his arms when I gave him a bath. Small, finger-shaped marks that made my stomach turn. When I asked Tommy how he got hurt, he whispered, "Grandma was mad." Before I could ask more, Dorothy appeared in the doorway. "What are you two whispering about?" she asked, her smile not reaching her eyes. Tommy immediately went silent, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Carl, Melissa's husband, always seemed to be around when these incidents happened. He was a large man who worked construction and believed in old-school child-rearing. I'd often hear him telling Robert that kids today were too soft and needed to be toughened up. He'd roughhouse with Tommy even when my son clearly didn't want to play, ignoring his protests with a laugh. "Don't raise a sissy, Ainsley," he'd say when I intervened. Melissa would just smile and nod, adding, "Carl knows what boys need. He's raising two strong sons." The financial pressure kept me trapped. Every time I looked at apartment listings, the security deposits and first month's rent seemed impossible. I was already working as many hours as the hospital would allow, and taking a second job would mean seeing Tommy even less. Dorothy knew this and would occasionally remind me of their generosity. "Not many grandparents would open their homes like this," she'd say while serving dinner. "We're saving you thousands in rent and childcare." After finding unexplained marks on Tommy 3 times in 2 weeks, I made a decision that would change everything. I ordered a small camera online, one designed to look like a teddy bear. I sewed it carefully into Tommy's backpack, positioning it so it would record whatever happened while I was at work. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I'd review the footage and find nothing but loving grandparents caring for their grandson. I prayed that would be the case. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong in that beautiful house. The way my son's light had dimmed, the way he'd grab my hand and whisper, "Don't go, Mommy," every morning, the way Dorothy's sweetness would turn to ice when she thought I wasn't looking. I activated the camera on a Monday morning, kissed my son goodbye, and went to work with a knot in my stomach. Whatever that camera would reveal, I promised myself I'd protect Tommy, no matter the cost. That first evening after installing the camera, I waited until everyone was asleep before reviewing the footage on my laptop in my room. My hands shook as I clicked play, part of me still hoping I'd see nothing but normal grandparent interactions. Instead, what unfolded on my screen made my blood run cold and ignited a rage I didn't know I was capable of feeling. The timestamp showed 9:15 in the morning. Tommy was sitting at the kitchen table with a small cup of apple juice. His little hands weren't quite steady, and some juice spilled onto the placemat. Before he could even react, Dorothy's hand shot out and grabbed his arm, yanking him so hard his feet left the ground. "You clumsy little brat," she hissed, her face twisted in anger. "Do you know how much these placemats cost?" Tommy's cry of pain made me want to reach through the screen. She dragged him to the sink, roughly scrubbing his hands under what must have been scalding water based on his screams. I had to pause the video to compose myself. This wasn't the Dorothy who smiled sweetly at church or posted grandparent quotes on Facebook. This was a monster wearing her face. I forced myself to continue watching, documenting everything in a notebook. 20 minutes later in the footage, Tommy was coloring quietly when Robert entered the kitchen. Without warning, he grabbed the back of Tommy's chair and shoved it hard against the table, crushing my son's little body against the edge. "Sit up straight when you're at the table," Robert barked. Tommy's whimper made my maternal instincts scream. The worst was yet to come. Around noon, Melissa arrived with Carl. I watched as Tommy, trying to be friendly, showed them his drawing. Carl looked at it and laughed mockingly. "What is this supposed to be? A dog? Looks like scribbles to me." He grabbed the paper and crumpled it up, tossing it in the trash. When Tommy's lower lip trembled, Melissa joined in. "Oh, don't be such a baby, Tommy. Real boys don't cry over drawings." My son ran to his room, and the camera caught Carl saying, "That kid needs to man up. Daniel would be embarrassed." Later that afternoon, the camera captured Tommy in the living room, playing quietly with his blocks. He was building what looked like a little house, completely absorbed in his imagination. Carl walked by and, without any reason, stuck his foot out and kicked the blocks, sending them flying. Tommy fell backward from the surprise, hitting his head on the coffee table. As my baby lay there crying, Carl stood over him laughing. Gotta stay alert, little man. World's a tough place. Dorothy, who witnessed the whole thing from her chair, simply said, "Tommy, stop being dramatic and clean up those blocks." The moment that broke me completely came near dinner time. Tommy, probably hungry and tired from the day's abuse, reached for a cookie from the jar on the counter. Dorothy's reaction was swift and vicious. She slapped his hand so hard the crack echoed through the kitchen. But she didn't stop there. She grabbed his little wrist and bent it backward, making him cry out in pain. "Greedy little boys get punished," she said in a sing-song voice that made my skin crawl. The red mark on his hand was clearly visible on camera, the same mark I'd seen that evening, but had been told was from playing too rough. I spent the rest of the night reviewing a week's worth of footage, each day revealing new horrors. I saw Dorothy lock Tommy in the basement storage room for 20 minutes because he wouldn't eat his carrots. I watched Robert push him off the couch because he was sitting in his spot. I witnessed Melissa teaching her children to call Tommy names like crybaby and mommy's boy. I documented Carl, playfully holding Tommy upside down until he was gasping for air, calling it astronaut training. The psychological torture was equally devastating. They would tell Tommy his daddy was disappointed in him from heaven. Dorothy would say things like, "Your mommy doesn't really love you. That's why she leaves you here all day." Robert would threaten that if Tommy told me anything, mommy will get in trouble and go away forever, just like daddy. They were systematically breaking my child's spirit and using his love for me as a weapon against him. By 5 in the morning, I had filled an entire notebook with timestamps and descriptions. I had uploaded everything to 3 different cloud storage services, emailed copies to my personal and work emails, and saved it on 2 USB drives. My next move was crucial. I needed to confront them, but I had to be strategic. These people had shown their true faces, and I knew they'd do anything to protect their reputation. I decided to start with Dorothy, catching her alone while Robert was at work. That afternoon, I came home early, claiming I felt sick. I found her in the kitchen, humming to herself while preparing dinner. "Dorothy, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning inside me. She turned with her fake smile. "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" I pulled out my phone and showed her a clip of her slapping Tommy's hand. The color drained from her face, then quickly returned as red rage. "You've been spying on us?" she shrieked, her mask finally dropping completely. "How dare you? After everything we've done for you." I stood my ground. "Everything you've done? You mean abusing my son? I have it all on camera, Dorothy. Every slap, every cruel word, every moment of torture you put him through." Her face contorted into something ugly. "You don't know what you're talking about. That's discipline. Something you clearly know nothing about, working all hours and abandoning your child." She immediately grabbed her phone and started texting furiously. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with messages from Robert and Melissa. Dorothy's version of events painted me as an unstable, paranoid woman who was seeing abuse where there was only loving discipline. By the time Robert stormed home from work early, the entire family had rallied against me. The battle lines were drawn, and I realized I wasn't just fighting for Tommy anymore. I was fighting against an entire family system built on cruelty and lies. Robert burst through the front door like a hurricane, his face purple with rage. Behind him came Melissa and Carl, clearly summoned for what was about to be an ambush disguised as a family meeting. They filed into the living room where Dorothy was already seated, dabbing at fake tears with a handkerchief. I stood my ground near the doorway, my phone clutched in my hand like a lifeline, Tommy safely upstairs napping. "Sit down," Robert commanded, pointing to a chair positioned like a defendant's seat facing them all. I remained standing. "I'll stand, thanks." His jaw clenched. "In my house, you'll show respect." The irony of him demanding respect while terrorizing my child wasn't lost on me. Dorothy continued her performance, sniffling delicately. "I've never been so hurt, Robert. We opened our home, and she accuses us of these horrible things." Melissa leaned forward, her voice dripping with false concern. "Ainsley, we're all worried about you. Losing Daniel was traumatic. It's understandable that you're not thinking clearly. Carl nodded sagely beside her. Grief can make people see things that aren't there. My buddy's wife went through something similar. Started imagining all sorts of stuff. They were laying the groundwork to paint me as mentally unstable, and I could see exactly where this was heading. I have video evidence, I stated firmly. Multiple incidents of physical abuse. Dorothy slapping Tommy, Robert shoving him, Carl deliberately hurting him. They all exchanged glances, and then Robert laughed, a cold sound that made my skin crawl. Videos can be edited, misinterpreted. A grandmother disciplining a misbehaving child is an abuse. You young mothers coddle your children, then wonder why they grow up weak. Dorothy suddenly stood, her tears miraculously dry. You know what I think? I think you're jealous. Jealous that Tommy loves us, that he's happy here while you're never around. You're trying to justify being an absent mother by inventing problems where none exist. The gaslighting was so blatant, so calculated, that I almost admired their coordination. They'd clearly discussed their strategy before confronting me. Robert's voice turned businesslike, his banker persona emerging. Here's what's going to happen, Ainsley. You're going to delete whatever videos you think you have. You're going to apologize to Dorothy for these baseless accusations. You're going to follow the rules of this house without question. Or you can pack your things and leave within 30 days. The room fell silent except for the grandfather clock ticking ominously in the corner. And if I refuse? I asked, already knowing the answer. Melissa smiled coldly. Then we'll have no choice but to contact Child Protective Services. Explain how you're showing signs of paranoid delusions, making false accusations against loving family members. We'll tell them about your long work hours, how Tommy is essentially raising himself. For respected community members versus one overwhelmed single mother? Who do you think they'll believe? Carl added his threat with a casual cruelty that made me understand where Tommy's bruises really came from. Plus, good luck finding affordable housing in this market. Security deposits, first and last month's rent, moving costs. All while paying for childcare since you won't have us anymore. You could end up homeless. Is that what you want for Tommy? The coordinated attack was devastating in its thoroughness. They'd thought of everything, every pressure point to exploit. Dorothy twisted the knife deeper. And don't think about spreading your lies around town. Robert golfs with Judge Harrison. I volunteer with the sheriff's wife. Melissa knows every teacher and administrator at the schools. Your reputation would be destroyed before you could blink. No one would hire a nurse who makes false abuse accusations. That night, their campaign of terror escalated. I woke at 3 a.m. to find my laptop missing from my room. Racing downstairs, I found it in pieces on the kitchen counter. Robert stood there in his pajamas, hammer in hand. Oops, he said flatly. Thought it was the old laptop we were recycling. Honest mistake. My backup drives were gone too, though I'd anticipated this and had copies in my car and work locker. Over the next week, their psychological warfare intensified. Dorothy would stand outside my door at night, talking loudly on the phone about unstable mothers who shouldn't have custody. I'd find my work uniforms in the garbage, covered in bleach. My mail started disappearing, including a letter from a lawyer I'd contacted. When I installed a lock on my bedroom door, I came home to find it had been removed. No locks in my house, Robert said. Family doesn't keep secrets. Melissa took to social media, posting vague but pointed updates. Praying for family members struggling with mental health issues. Sometimes tough love means protecting children from harmful delusions. Grateful for parents who provide stable homes when others can't. Her friends would comment with prayers and heart emojis, having no idea they were enabling abusers. The isolation was suffocating. Dorothy called my sister Emma in California, spinning tales of my supposed breakdown. We're so worried about her, I heard her say. She's seeing things that aren't there, making wild accusations. Poor Tommy is caught in the middle. When Emma called me concerned, I had to spend an hour convincing her I was sane while Dorothy listened from the next room, smirking. Carl's intimidation became physical. He'd stand too close when I was getting Tommy ready, blocking doorways so I'd have to squeeze past him. Once, he grabbed my wrist when I reached for Tommy's backpack, squeezing hard enough to leave marks. "Careful," he whispered. "Accidents happen to people who aren't careful." His message was clear. They weren't above hurting me too. The incident that nearly broke me happened on a Thursday. I came home to find Tommy locked in his room, the door handle removed from the inside. He'd been there for hours, Dorothy claimed, as punishment for lying about Grandma. My son had wet himself, terrified and alone. As I held him, sobbing apologies, Dorothy stood in the doorway. "This is what happens when you fill his head with nonsense." He told the neighbor I hit him. I had to explain you've been coaching him to lie. Robert chose that moment to deliver his final ultimatum. "Tomorrow, family meeting. You'll apologize publicly, delete any remaining videos in front of us, and sign an agreement about house rules going forward. Or start packing. Your choice." He handed me a typed document outlining rules that essentially made me a prisoner. No visitors, no phone calls without permission, mandatory family counseling with their chosen therapist to address my issues. That night, as I held my sleeping son, I made my decision. They thought they'd won, that they'd terrorized me into submission. They believed their own narrative that I was a weak, helpless single mother with nowhere to turn. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated a mother's love and the lengths she'd go to protect her child. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be apologizing. Tomorrow, I'd begin my war. The morning of their demanded family meeting, I didn't go to work. Instead, I dropped Tommy at daycare early and drove straight to the office of Judith Jin, a family lawyer recommended by a fellow nurse whose cousin had escaped an abusive situation. Judith was a small woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. After reviewing my evidence, she leaned back in her chair with a grim smile. "They've made several mistakes. Threatening you, destroying your property, restricting your freedom, and most importantly, documented child abuse. We can work with this." She outlined a strategic plan that made me feel empowered for the first time in weeks. First, we'd file for an emergency protective order using the video evidence. Second, document everything meticulously going forward. Third, build a support network they couldn't intimidate. Record every interaction, she advised. Maryland is a two-party consent state, but you can record if you fear imminent harm, which clearly applies here. She gave me a tiny recording device that looked like a pen. "Keep this on you always." My next stop was Tommy's pediatrician, Dr. Sarah Winters. I'd been seeing her since Tommy was born, and she knew our family history. When I showed her the footage and the photos I'd taken of Tommy's bruises, her professional demeanor cracked. "My God, Ainsley. This is systematic abuse." She examined Tommy's old medical records, noting patterns she'd previously attributed to normal childhood accidents. "I'll be filing a mandatory report today. This creates an official paper trail they can't dispute." That evening, I returned to the house with my recorder running. The family was assembled in the living room like a tribunal. Dorothy had even set out tea and cookies, as if this was a social gathering rather than an ambush. I sat down calmly, noting Carl's surprised expression. They'd expected me broken, defeated. Instead, I pulled out a folder and placed it on the coffee table. "Before we begin, I have some documents for you to review." Robert snatched the folder, his face paling as he read the protective order filing. "You think this scares us? Our lawyer will tear this apart." I smiled. "Perhaps. But page 3 might interest you more." He flipped to find screenshots of the videos I'd saved, each timestamped and annotated. Dorothy gasped when she saw herself slapping Tommy, the image crystal clear. "There are 12 copies of these files," I said evenly. "In various locations you'll never find." Melissa tried to maintain control. "This changes nothing. You still need somewhere to live." That's when I dropped my second bomb. "Actually, I've secured an apartment." My coworkers at the hospital started a GoFundMe when they learned about our situation. Raised enough for a security deposit and 3 months' rent in 2 days. Turns out, people don't like child abusers. The lie rolled off my tongue smoothly. The fundraiser was real, but I'd started it anonymously, knowing they'd check. The meeting devolved into chaos. Robert threatened to call CPS immediately. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. "Please call them. I have Dr. Winters on speed dial. She's already filed a report about Tommy's injuries. Would you like to explain to investigators why you destroyed my laptop? Why you removed my door lock? Why my mail has been mysteriously disappearing? Carl stood up aggressively, but I held up my pen recorder. Everything we're saying is being recorded. Please, Carl, make another threat. Over the following days, I executed my plan with military precision. While they slept, I installed tiny cameras in common areas, perfectly legal since I was a tenant. I picked up extra night shifts, but instead of leaving Tommy with them, I'd arranged care with Brenda, a retired nurse from my unit who was appalled by my situation. The family was furious, but couldn't legally prevent me from arranging alternative childcare. Dorothy's attempts to maintain her public image backfired spectacularly. When she called my sister Emma again, she didn't know I'd already sent Emma the videos. Emma played along, gathering information while recording the call. Dorothy unknowingly admitted to disciplining Tommy, claiming I was too soft on him. She even mentioned the basement punishment, calling it necessary timeout for defiant behavior. The game changer came when I discovered they'd been intercepting my mail. I'd had important documents sent to the house, including bank statements showing suspicious withdrawals. Robert had been slowly draining a small account Daniel had left for Tommy, probably assuming I wouldn't notice amid my grief. This was federal mail fraud on top of theft. When I confronted him with copies of the statements, his banker's composure finally cracked. Their escalation turned desperate. Dorothy began following me to work, sitting in the hospital parking lot and photographing everyone I talked to. Melissa created a fake social media account to spread rumors in local mom groups, claiming I was an unstable mother who coaches her child to lie. Carl's intimidation became reckless. He'd rev his truck engine when I walked Tommy to my car, once coming close enough that I had to jump back. Everything came to a head when they made their biggest mistake. Frustrated by my refusal to brake, they actually called CPS with a false report. They claimed I was using drugs, neglecting Tommy, and showing signs of psychological breakdown. What they didn't anticipate was that CPS investigator Janet Rodriguez had already reviewed Dr. Winters' report and my evidence. She arrived for the emergency visit with a very different agenda than they expected. I'll never forget Dorothy's face when Janet asked to speak with her about the abuse allegations against her. The investigator had seen the videos, read the medical reports, and noted the pattern of injuries. She interviewed Tommy gently, using dolls and drawing materials. Even at 4, his stories were consistent with the documented abuse. Carl tried to leave, but Janet informed him he was named in the report and needed to remain for questioning. The investigation turned the tables completely. Instead of losing Tommy, I was commended for protecting him and documenting the abuse. The family was flagged in the system, their house subject to surprise visits. Robert's reputation at the bank took a hit when word spread. Dorothy was asked to take a break from her volunteer position at the Children's Hospital. Melissa found herself under scrutiny from other PTA members who'd started questioning her posts. But I wasn't done. My lawyer had advised building an airtight case before filing for the restraining order. Every threat, every incident of harassment, every attempted intimidation was documented. I'd learned to play their game, but better. Where they relied on reputation and intimidation, I had evidence and legal strategy. The predators had become prey, and they were about to learn what happened when a mother's protective instincts were fully unleashed. With my lawyer Judith's guidance, we filed for the restraining order on a Wednesday morning. The courthouse clerk's eyes widened as she reviewed the thick folder of evidence, printed screenshots from videos, medical reports, CPS investigation notes, and witness statements. By noon, we had an emergency hearing scheduled for Friday. The speed of the legal system's response told me everything about how seriously they were taking this case. Robert and Dorothy would be served papers at their home that evening. But I had another plan running parallel to the legal proceedings. The community needed to know the truth about the pillars of society who tortured children behind closed doors. I carefully edited together a compilation video, blurring Tommy's face but leaving the adults clearly visible. Each clip was time-stamped and included subtitles describing what happened before and after. The video was undeniable proof of systematic abuse, impossible to explain away as discipline or misunderstanding. I shared this video first in a private Facebook group called Moms of Maryland, where I'd been a quiet member for 2 years. My post was simple: please watch this before you trust Robert and Dorothy Henderson with your children. They're my son's grandparents. Within an hour, the post had over 300 reactions and 50 comments expressing horror and outrage. Several members recognized Dorothy from church events. Others knew Robert from the country club. The cognitive dissonance was palpable as people reconciled the public faces with the private monsters. The video spread like wildfire. Someone shared it to the Maryland Child Care Warnings group. Another person posted it in the community newsletter's discussion forum. By Thursday morning, Dorothy's phone was ringing nonstop. Her church friends demanded explanations. The pastor called to say she was suspended from teaching Sunday school pending investigation. Her book club collectively uninvited her from future meetings. The speed of her social downfall was breathtaking. Robert's professional world crumbled just as quickly. A bank employee saw the video and reported it to corporate HR. Suddenly, the man who lorded his position over others was called into meetings about conduct unbecoming a senior manager. His golf buddies canceled their weekly game. The country club president called to discuss his membership status. The respect he'd cultivated for decades evaporated in 48 hours. Melissa's reaction was pure rage. She showed up at my workplace, screaming in the hospital parking lot about defamation and lawsuits. Security had to escort her off the property, but not before several of my colleagues witnessed her unhinged behavior. She tried damage control on social media, claiming the videos were edited and taken out of context, but people had seen too much. Parents started pulling their children from playdates with her kids. The PTA president called an emergency meeting about her continued involvement. The legal retaliation came swiftly. They hired Maxwell Sterling, known as the most aggressive family lawyer in the state. He sent cease and desist letters demanding I remove all videos and posts. He threatened defamation suits, claiming damages for emotional distress and lost reputation. But Judith had anticipated this. Every word I'd posted was carefully factual. The videos spoke for themselves. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation, and we had truth in spades. Friday's court hearing was a massacre. Dorothy arrived in her best church outfit, trying to look like a gentle grandmother. Robert wore his most expensive suit, projecting authority. Carl and Melissa sat behind them, glaring at me with undisguised hatred. Their lawyer tried every trick, questioning the video's authenticity, suggesting I'd provoked the incidents, even implying I'd coached Tommy to get injured for sympathy. Judge Patricia Lawson, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, was having none of it. When our turn came, Judith methodically presented our case. The videos played on the courtroom screen, each slap and shove magnified for all to see. Dr. Winters testified about the pattern of injuries. The CPS investigator detailed her findings. Tommy's daycare teacher described his behavioral changes. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source, their neighbor, elderly Mrs. Chin, who'd heard Robert's threats through the walls and seen Dorothy lock Tommy in the basement. Their lawyer tried to discredit Mrs. Chin, but she held firm. "I've lived next door for 20 years, she said quietly. "I know what I heard. That poor baby crying for his mama while they laughed." Dorothy actually sobbed at that, but the judge's expression suggested she wasn't buying the performance. Melissa made things worse by committing perjury, claiming she'd never witnessed any abuse. Judith calmly presented a video of Melissa laughing while Carl tripped Tommy, her voice clear on the audio saying he needed to toughen up. The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. A 2-year restraining order preventing them from coming within 500 feet of Tommy or me. They were ordered to pay my legal fees, moving expenses, and Tommy's therapy costs. The judge noted the particularly egregious nature of using positions of trust and family bonds to perpetrate abuse. She also referred the case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. Robert's face turned gray at that announcement. The community backlash intensified after the hearing. Local news picked up the story: prominent bank manager and wife accused of child abuse. The articles included quotes from the judge's ruling and mentioned the video evidence. Robert's bank launched a full investigation. Within a week, he was placed on administrative leave. Dorothy's volunteer positions all quietly requested her resignation. Their beautiful house became a prison as former friends crossed streets to avoid them. Carl's construction business suffered when word spread. Parents didn't want someone who hurt children working on their homes. 3 major contracts were canceled within days. His own marriage imploded when the stress triggered existing problems. Melissa, faced with social isolation and a crumbling home life, finally broke. She called me sobbing one night, alternating between apologies and accusations. I recorded the call, of course, capturing her admission that she knew Mom and Dad went too far sometimes, but their family. The attempts to circumvent the restraining order started immediately. They sent flying monkeys, mutual acquaintances who just wanted to talk about healing the family. Dorothy's sister called from Florida, begging me to reconsider for family unity. Robert's brother offered to mediate, suggesting I was overreacting to normal grandparent discipline. Each attempt was documented and reported to the court, adding to their legal troubles. The most pathetic manipulation came 2 weeks later. Dorothy staged a medical emergency, having a neighbor call to say she'd collapsed and was asking for me. I didn't fall for it, instead calling the police for a wellness check. They found her perfectly healthy, and she received a warning about false emergency reports. The neighbor, horrified to learn she'd been used, became another community member who cut ties with them. Their isolation was complete, a prison of their own making. The criminal charges came down 3 weeks after the restraining order. Robert faced 2 counts of child abuse and 1 count of destruction of property for my laptop. Dorothy was charged with 3 counts of child abuse and false imprisonment for locking Tommy in rooms. Carl got assault charges for the physical intimidation. Melissa escaped criminal charges, but faced perjury consequences from the family court. Their mugshots in the local paper showed faces aged years and weeks, their carefully maintained facades crumbling like old paint. They doubled down with new legal representation, bringing in a team from the Capitol that specialized in reputation rehabilitation for wealthy clients. These lawyers immediately filed counterclaims. Alienation of affection, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and even sought emergency grandparent rights, claiming I was systematically erasing loving grandparents from their grandson's life. The audacity would have been laughable if the stakes weren't so high. The grandparent rights hearing became their last stand. They'd spent thousands on a child psychologist who'd never met Tommy, but was prepared to testify about the psychological damage of grandparent alienation. They'd gathered character witnesses from their church, though notably fewer than they'd hoped. Many former friends had politely declined to get involved. They even hired a private investigator to follow me, hoping to catch something incriminating. Our preparation was meticulous. Tommy had been seeing Dr. Lisa Patel, a child trauma specialist, for 2 months. Her reports detailed the classic signs of abuse victims: regression, nightmares, fear of adult men, and flinching at sudden movements. She'd used play therapy to help Tommy express his experiences, and his drawings were heartbreaking, pictures of himself tiny and cowering while giant figures loomed over him. These became crucial evidence. The courthouse was packed for the hearing. Word had spread through social media, and child advocacy groups showed interest. Robert and Dorothy arrived looking like casualties of war. His bank executive presence had withered into hollow-eyed desperation. Her perfectly coiffed appearance had devolved into harsh makeup trying to hide sleepless nights. Melissa sat rigidly beside them, while Carl was notably absent, dealing with his own legal troubles. Their psychologist testified first, spouting theories about grandparent bonds and childhood development. Judith's cross-examination was surgical. Had he reviewed the abuse videos? No. Had he interviewed Tommy? No. Had he read the CPS reports? No. His credibility evaporated as he admitted his entire opinion was based on general research and the family's version of events. By the end, Even their own lawyer looked embarrassed. When Dr. Patel took the stand, the contrast was stark. She'd spent dozens of hours with Tommy, had reviewed all evidence, and consulted with his pediatrician. Her testimony about Tommy's trauma symptoms was devastating. She showed his drawings to the court, explaining how abused children often minimize themselves in pictures while making their abusers appear huge and threatening. One drawing showed a small figure locked in a black box, while larger figures stood outside. Tommy had told her it was, "when Grandma put me in the dark place." The character witnesses they'd managed to gather were underwhelming. Their pastor admitted he'd only known them from Sunday services. A fellow bank employee stumbled when asked if he'd ever seen Robert with children. Dorothy's hairdresser rambled about what a good Christian woman she was, but couldn't speak to her interactions with Tommy. Meanwhile, our witnesses painted a clear picture of systematic abuse and its effects on a small child. But the most dramatic moment came when Tommy's guardian ad litem, a court-appointed child advocate named Jennifer Martinez, presented her report. She'd interviewed Tommy multiple times in child-friendly settings. Her findings were unequivocal. Tommy displayed clear trauma responses to his grandparents' names and photos. He told her, in his 4-year-old vocabulary, about being hit, locked in scary places, and told his mommy would go away if he talked. The courtroom was silent as she recommended zero contact until Tommy was old enough to decide for himself. Robert lost his composure during testimony, his banker's dignity cracking as he shouted that we were destroying their lives over normal discipline. The judge had to gavel him to order twice. Dorothy wept through her testimony, but her tears felt performative compared to her cold cruelty in the videos. She claimed they were saving Tommy from becoming soft and that children need firm boundaries. When asked about locking him in rooms, she insisted it was just time out, until Judith presented photos of the basement storage room. No lights, no windows, concrete floor. Melissa's testimony backfired spectacularly. She tried to paint me as an unfit mother who worked too much, but Judith introduced evidence of Melissa's own CPS investigation. Apparently, after seeing our case, a mandatory reporter at her children's school had noted concerning signs. The investigation was ongoing, but the implication was clear. If she'd normalized abuse against Tommy, what was happening in her own home? She left the stand in tears, Carl's empty seat beside their lawyer speaking volumes. The private investigator's testimony should have helped them. He'd followed me for 2 weeks, documenting my activities. Instead, his reports showed a devoted mother working hard, caring for her son and rebuilding their lives. The worst thing he could report was that I'd been to 3 apartment viewings and once bought Tommy ice cream for breakfast after a therapy session. If anything, his surveillance proved my stability and focus on Tommy's well-being. Judge Lawson's ruling was comprehensive and scathing. She found no legitimate basis for grandparent visitation rights when said grandparents have perpetrated documented abuse. She noted the disturbing pattern of minimizing and justifying violence against a minor child. Not only were they denied any visitation rights, but the restraining order was extended to 5 years. She also ordered them to pay all court costs and my attorney fees, a sum that would reach 6 figures. The criminal trials proceeded over the following months. Robert pled no contest to avoid jail time, receiving probation and mandatory anger management. The bank fired him immediately, his decades-long career ending in disgrace. Dorothy fought the charges, but was convicted on all counts. The judge, citing her position of trust as a former teacher, sentenced her to 90 days in jail and 2 years probation. Carl pled guilty to assault and received community service. Melissa's perjury charge resulted in probation and a permanent record that would haunt her PDA ambitions. Their house went on the market within 6 months. The legal fees, combined with Robert's lost income and their social pariah status, made the expensive neighborhood unsustainable. I heard they moved to a small apartment in another county, their retirement savings decimated by legal battles they'd initiated. Dorothy's sister stopped speaking to her after learning the full truth. Robert's brother sent me a letter apologizing for his attempted intervention. The family empire they'd built on reputation and intimidation had crumbled entirely. 6 months after the final court ruling, Tommy and I were thriving in our new apartment. It wasn't fancy like Robert and Dorothy's house, but it was ours. Tommy had his own room decorated with dinosaurs and stars, a space where he felt safe. The nightmares that had plagued him for months were becoming less frequent. Dr. Patel said his resilience was remarkable, crediting the swift intervention and consistent therapy. Children, she reminded me, could heal from trauma when given love, safety, and support. My sister Emma flew in from California for Tommy's 5th birthday, her first visit since everything exploded. She'd been horrified to learn how Dorothy had manipulated her, using her distance and trust against us. Emma spent a week helping us settle into our new life, painting Tommy's room and taking us on adventures to the zoo and museums. "I should have known something was wrong," she said one evening after Tommy was asleep. "You've never been one to exaggerate or lie. I'm sorry I even questioned you for a moment." Her support meant everything. The community that had emerged around us was unexpected and overwhelming. My colleagues at the hospital had not only contributed to our moving fund, but also organized meal trains during the worst of the legal battles. Brenda, the retired nurse who'd watched Tommy, became like an adopted grandmother. She'd come over for Sunday dinners, teaching Tommy card games and telling him stories about her own grandchildren. He started calling her Grandma Brenda, and neither of us corrected him. I joined a support group for parents dealing with family abuse situations. Every Thursday evening, while Tommy was at his art therapy class, I sat in a circle with other survivors. There was Mark, whose father had been physically abusive to his daughter. Sarah, whose mother-in-law had systematically undermined her parenting until her marriage collapsed. James, whose brother had hurt his son during roughhousing. We shared our stories, our legal strategies, and most importantly, our healing journeys. I wasn't alone. The blog started almost by accident. Someone in the support group suggested I write about recognizing hidden abuse in caregivers. My first post, "When Grandparents Aren't Grand: Recognizing Abuse Behind Closed Doors," went viral within days. I detailed warning signs I'd missed, the gradual isolation, the gaslighting, the way abusers counted on family loyalty to hide their crimes. The comments section filled with similar stories. Parents thanking me for validating their suspicions. Grandparents horrified but grateful for the education. Even some family lawyers reached out, asking permission to reference my experience in training materials. A publisher contacted me about turning the blog into a book. A documentary filmmaker wanted to explore our story as part of a larger piece on family abuse. Speaking engagements at child welfare conferences followed. I was careful to protect Tommy's privacy, never showing his face or using his real name in public forums. But our story was helping others, and that felt like purpose born from pain. The day Robert and Dorothy's house sale closed, I received an unexpected letter forwarded through my lawyer. Dorothy had written 8 pages of what seemed to be an apology, but read more like self-justification. She blamed her own harsh upbringing, Robert's pressure to raise strong children, and even Daniel's death for their behavior. Nowhere did she truly acknowledge the harm they'd caused Tommy. She ended by asking if she could send birthday cards. I filed the letter with all the other evidence unanswered. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt with words. More surprising was the letter from Melissa that arrived 2 months later. Her divorce from Carl was final, and she'd been attending therapy. Her letter was different from Dorothy's, filled with genuine remorse. She wrote about recognizing the cycle of abuse she'd perpetuated, how she'd normalized violence because it was familiar. She didn't ask for forgiveness or contact, just wanted me to know she was working to be better for her own children. I wrote back a brief acknowledgement, wishing her well in her healing journey. Sometimes people could change, but that didn't mean they deserved access to those they'd hurt. Tommy started kindergarten at a new school where nobody knew our story. He made friends quickly, his natural sunshine personality emerging from behind the clouds of trauma. His teacher, unaware of his history, commented on what a kind, empathetic child he was. He always notices when other children are sad, she told me at parent-teacher conference. He shares his snacks and includes everyone in games. I realized his experience, as horrible as it was, had taught him compassion. He knew what it felt like to hurt, so he tried to prevent others from feeling that way. The speaking engagement that changed everything came at a national conference on child protection. I was on a panel with CPS workers, child psychologists, and legal advocates. The room was packed with professionals who worked with abused children daily. I told our story, showed excerpts from the videos, and explained how community support and swift legal action had saved my son. The standing ovation was overwhelming, but more important were the professionals who approached afterward, saying my presentation would change how they approached cases. That presentation led to consulting work with child welfare organizations. I kept my nursing job, but reduced hours to develop training materials about recognizing and documenting abuse. The income from speaking and consulting not only provided financial stability, but also funded Tommy's ongoing therapy and activities. We were building a life not just free from abuse, but filled with opportunity and joy. A year after everything ended, I took Tommy to the beach for a weekend getaway. As I watched him build sandcastles, laughing when waves knocked them down only to rebuild with determination, I saw Daniel and his resilience. My husband would have been proud of how I'd protected our son, even if it meant destroying his parents. That night, as Tommy slept peacefully in the hotel room, I stood on the balcony thinking about the journey. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I'd never installed that camera. Would the abuse have escalated? Would Tommy have eventually broken under their cruelty? Would I have remained trapped by financial necessity and misplaced family loyalty? The what-ifs could be haunting, but they also reminded me that one decision, one moment of maternal instinct, had changed everything. The footage hadn't just spoken, it had screamed the truth that saved my son's childhood and possibly his life. Looking back, I understood that Robert and Dorothy had counted on silence, on family shame, on my isolation and desperation. They'd believed their reputation and resources would always protect them. They'd never imagined that a single mother working double shifts could bring down their carefully constructed kingdom. But they'd underestimated the most powerful force in the world, a mother's love and determination to protect her child. As I tucked Tommy into bed in our safe, happy home, he looked up at me with those trusting eyes. "Mommy, are the mean people gone forever?" he asked. I smoothed his hair and kissed his forehead. "Yes, baby. They're gone forever. You're safe now." He smiled and closed his eyes, secure in the knowledge that his mother would always protect him. And I would. The footage had spoken, justice had been served, and we were finally free. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who are hurting your children? How did you find the courage to put your child's safety above family loyalty? Please share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of parents who fought back against family abuse. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they're not alone in protecting their children. Thank you for listening to our journey, and remember, when it comes to your child's safety, you have the right to let the footage speak, to demand justice, and to break free from anyone who causes harm, no matter who they are. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and never apologize for being a fierce protector of your children.